think, oh, do you have to do something to make it go away? Okay, great. So we're in Ecclesiastes, and I have to say, I was thrilled when I had a chance to teach this class because this is my dad's all-time favorite book in the Bible. And verse 15 is his favorite verse. Can everybody hear me okay? 15 is his favorite verse. There's nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. So there are other variations of this passage in Ecclesiastes that talk about, nothing better than to work and, to be productive and do things with your hands. Off and on throughout my life, I've found this particular verse from my dad either something that I found really reassuring or really disconcerting, depending on where I was in my life. So that's kind of how I'm feeling about this chapter in general and in Ecclesiastes in general. Is that I don't always sit well with Ecclesiastes, and I think you'll understand why as we go through this. It's just filled with paradoxes and seeming contradictions about how we should view the world and how we should view justice in the world. And I don't know about you, but now that I've worked on this chapter, it's incredibly contemporary. And it's contemporary because it addresses a lot of the struggles that all of us have about justice and about conflict in the world right now. And as we get through this, you will understand, I think, what I'm talking about. Particularly as it relates to the war in Ukraine right now. That it's just, we're going to be challenged by some of the ideas in this chapter. And I'm going to, rather than espouse my wisdom to you all, you can help me figure out how to address those challenges. So, and in the end, though, this verse, there's nothing better than for a person under the sun than to eat, drink, and be glad. So ultimately, that is the question that we've always had in this series, which is to be happy or not, right? And I would propose that it's both, and we'll get to that. So I have a theme word from my going from the page down. It's not there we go. This is my theme word, really. So after we read each section, I'm gonna ask this question, really, because the answer is really can be very complicated. Chapter 8 is kind of broken up into two sections. The first section is about governments and kings, and the second section, a lot of the commentaries use the word vanity. But as you read the second half of the book, you realize it's about perplexity. I am perplexed by the second half of this book. Let me be honest with you. So if you have the chapter open, you can follow along, or I'll just read the entire thing first, and then we'll go from there. Who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its heart and curls. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, what are you doing? Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter. Sounds very familiar. There's a time and a place. For There is a proper time and procedure for every matter. Though a person may weigh down in misery, since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the time of their death. No one is discharged in time of war. So wickedness will not release those who embrace it. All this I saw. By the way, Eddie started this music. Alexa, stop. Wow. Alexa's the only woman in my house that will listen to me. And that includes the two Juliets. But let's finish. Keep reading. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There's a time when a man lords over others to his own hurt. Then too, I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know it will go better for those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, the wicked who get what the righteous deserve, this too is meaningless. I'd like for you, when you hear the word meaningless, I found it very useful to also drop in the word perplexing, because that makes so much more sense to me. This is perplexing. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of their life that God has given them under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labor that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim to know, they cannot really comprehend it. So we'll just start our way through the passage. I'm a little concerned that how will I know whether someone is asking to join? It'll pop up here?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Chris isn't joining. This is fascinating to me. The chapter starts with who is like the wise, who knows the explanation of things. A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hearts. Now, I'm not going to talk about this because I want us to go through the whole chapter and then come back to this at the end, because I think it's going to be a little clearer at the end. I will also give you a hint that my dad is the epitome of this wisdom, and he in his 94 years, he turned 94 on Thursday, is wise and kind and not hard at all. And there's a key here to something that we need to understand. Okay, so
With a name.
I don't know about that. So this is the first passage that I'm really struggling with, because let's just all put ourselves in a position right now. Say you're a Russian citizen, you know that bad things are happening, and you read this passage. What does it say? Obey the king's command. I say because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. I immediately thought of Putin, when I read that.
And I would be thinking, who made Putin king?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, and the voices, the people who read this originally had the same experience with abusive kings. I mean, is that what we're really instructed to do, to obey them? Since a king's word is supreme, who can say, what are you doing? Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. So, and it goes on, it talks about some of the things that are going on now. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has the power over the wind to contain it, so no one has the power over the time of death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release practice. So based upon the contemporary times we live in, how do we reconcile this
Perplexing.
It is perplexing. Yeah.
You know, I think Ecclesiastes is the book that proves Scripture is contextual. I mean, all Scripture is contextual to understand it in terms of its historical moment and its historical occasion. That may not be clear to the average reader, but if that's not clear when you're reading Ecclesiastes, you're a poor reader. So in this case, you know, in that time period, what options did they have? I mean, you could have a commoner who didn't know squat about anything.
Right.
Or you could have a king who sometimes was good and sometimes was bad. But you didn't really have a whole lot of option.
Right.
Where in our age, the autocrat is clearly an aberration in the West.
Right.
Should be. But most nations, including ours, play with the idea.
Right.
But I mean, so it's context. It's, king is the model. I mean, it's the political model of the time.
Right. And they did not have a choice. They did not have much control. I don't know about you all, but I feel like there's very little I can do with praying. And it breaks my heart. So there's something to learn here, but there's also something to be said about activism and about, but this is not it. I mean, this is kind of pretty instructive. You obey the king. He's going to do what he's going to do. You shouldn't even question him. So I'm very challenged by this passage. Eric.
Yeah, well, and this is to kind of dovetail what Dale was saying. This is what happens. This is what happens when we dovetail, you know, and try to make Scripture fit the questions we want. These are not the questions that this chapter is asking, because in this setting, the king would be if you consider all the jobs that the king has. The king is the law. He makes the laws. He doesn't like say, this is a good idea. What do you guys think?
Right.
The king makes the laws. The king has someone execute his laws for him. You know, we don't have that kind of government, at least in the West. You know, there are some places where there is still that totalitarian government. The king is it.
Right.
You know, so we can't compare. Well, we can't ask that question because we don't have a king.
Right.
We have a president that we have the choice to vote for or not. If you didn't vote for him, you got to deal with who he is. But you also have 435 people in Washington, or 535 people in Washington, D.C., who are between you and the king, so to speak. Who are, you know, and they make laws, and they're responsible for the laws. And we have another 9 people that interpret those laws. So it's not just the king saying, I want this done, do it.
Right.
It's a statement of, I'd like to get this done. Can you help me do it?
But I get it. So that, you know, I think all of us agree democracy is a very fragile thing, and that we have to protect it for that very reason. But you know, it's interesting. I've read a lot of commentaries that were written in the, you know, mid to middle late 20th century. It's hard to believe it. I mean, I lived the bulk of my life in the 20th century. Their instructions about this passage were so benign because you couldn't, you know, it's like, well, the king wants these benign things done, just leave that to him, basically, what's the commentary. What in these days and times, it can be much more dangerous than that. So have we answered our question? Yes.
I think there is some wisdom in knowing that when the word of the king is supreme, and who may say the word of the devil. I mean, that's just true.
Yeah.
You know, the chances of you being able to change Putin's mind seem kind of low.
Yeah.
You know, so there's some wisdom in knowing that, and it is interesting in this translation. It says, "For whoever keeps a command will know the evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way." So it does suggest that there, you know, there is going to be a time when we may stand up against it.
Right.
It's not
And-
completely.
and
That's
in-
Ecclesiastes. as you're
And in
saying.
fact, the second half of this touches on that point. You know, through the arc of history, justice will be served. I mean, that's a clear imperative from God, but not necessarily in our time, which is the tough part. So moving on to verses 9 and 10. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything under the sun. There's a time when the man lords over others to his own hurt. Isn't that interesting? Even the dictator is doing things to his own hurt. Then too, I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy places and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless, or I'm going to say perplexing. Well, in a way, this is saying, oh, they get what they deserve, you know. But then we read on. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will be better for those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. So what does this say about justice in our times?
It seems like the whole chapter, and maybe the whole book, it kind of goes back and forth to me to this concept of balance, this concept of fairness. You know, to me, the piece about the king is sort of like when Jesus says, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's." You know, there's going to be sort of this base level, but then there's an above level, above Caesar. You know, and that's where the wisdom comes in terms of finding out what is fair and what is balanced. But here's the key. You know, I think a younger or less mature thought is that, you know, if you do the right thing, life will be fair to you. And that's not true, right? Fairness, you know, you can have 100 crimes and you can still get away with it, or have none, and you do one infraction and you may have to pay for that. So it's sort of going back and forth between ideas and ideals and reality. And you can't get caught in either one. You can't take either one to the extreme, because life is just not like that. So look at the greater principles of what is true and what is wise, not the law versus spirit, for instance. And I think that's why it is perplexing. It keeps going in and out of this thematically, but the ultimate end is that you're going to be faced with everything, and your goal is to look beyond the little pieces and look at the greater picture where God is.
Yeah. And I think one way to help us do that is to, for those of us who are a little older, this is an easier exercise, but one way to do this is to think about things that appear to be unjust earlier in your life and see how the arc of right and just eventually happened. Does anybody have any examples of that in their life, either in their personal lives or in their experience in the world? No one wants to confess. But, you know, whether it becomes apparent to you now or you think about it later, it happens all the time. I mean, there are things that happened to me 20 years ago, 30 years ago that I didn't understand. And in retrospect, it worked out. It worked out well for me. It did not necessarily well for those people that I thought were getting away with all kinds of things. This is something. Let's see, where am I here? I find verse 11 fascinating because when we get a little impatient, sometimes I almost want to be a vigilante. I want to go out there and make it right. You know, at least I dream about that. So the problem is that we get a little impatient about justice. And I think maybe this is what ties into the previous passage about, you know, obeying kings, is that even though the king is doing horrible things, what you don't want to do is what is done here, which is, well, the sentence isn't held, you know, isn't meted out quickly enough for me. So people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. And isn't that in itself what perpetuates conflict all over the world? It's this idea that there's this profound injustice, which is true. But then someone wants to do something even worse to somebody else. And it just becomes this perpetual cycle. So I think that's a challenge. We should be patient. That's what I'm learning first. To be patient about justice, because if we rush to do something wrong in place of justice, we're going to be in trouble. Does anybody think? Can anybody think of an example of that?
Well, I'm sorry, I can't really think of an example, but what I am thinking is that, you know, just the phrase, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. That wrongdoing and the fact that you wanted to see it, you wanted to see justice, but is now you're allowing that to turn your heart to do wrong. So I had heard it said years ago in a Bible class, it's not necessarily the thing that you do, but the fact that you return to want to do it.
Right.
So you're changing yourself to be just like the people that you want
Right.
punished.
And what should haunt you is the first verse of chapter 8. Who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its heart. So the opposite of a wise person is the vigilante. When you think about it.
I'm thinking of people like Emmett Till. I'm thinking of the civil rights movement and how people who believe that they were Christians and in power, I think this applies to them.
Right.
How you can think that you are Christian and really think that people are less than you.
Right. Absolutely. And the pressure, I'm sure, on all kinds of civil rights leaders to do something really bad to other people was intense. And for them to avoid that was the right thing to do. And our history tells us it was the right thing to do, right? The whole nonviolence movement was the right thing to do. Right? And
Whereas in contrast, you had George Floyd and those who chose to protest Reconstruction, or 6th. You know, it's the response that is in the anti-wise way, in the non-Christian way, to Tony's point.
Right. Even someone who has a legitimate sense of something unjust happening, that I'm sure, as that was at the heart of a lot of motivation for people on January 6th. Something bad happened, it may have been justified even. But then to rush to do bad things in that context was not the right thing to do.
The type of execution matters.
Right,
How you're gonna execute.
right. Execution matters. There's something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too is meaningless. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there's nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat, drink, and be glad. Then the joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of their life that God has given them under the sun. Okay, so this is my question. In the face of injustice, in the face of being wrong, is this just an invitation to be either nihilistic or escapist? I'm not going to deal with it. Everybody knows the song, right? Don't worry. Is that what we're talking about?
So I think we understand life isn't fair. We understand justice takes a long time, but we still have to continue living. And so I think what we're seeing here is, all right, there's all this other stuff that's happening. Don't forget about what's most important. You know, get joy out of life, be together, be calm about things. The other stuff, we get involved in that if we want, but the priority should be the most basic and doing.
Right.
Because we can't wrestle life for our good. We can't bring justice to them. We could do our part, but we have to take it sort of a bite.
So we'll get more into this, but I think for me to deal with this whole idea of being happy and, you know, enjoying drinking food and enjoying my work and all those other things, for this, I say yes to both. Yes to both. We can be happy and we can be terribly struck and downhearted about what's happening in the world.
But we can also, I mean, we had an example over dinner last night where we talked about a young girl's response to an unjust situation. And we know why she responded that way. We know what she's been taught. And those lessons can't happen over a dinner table at home, a breakfast meal or something like that. So it's not like while we're sitting around eating and drinking, we're not accomplishing that. We may be accomplishing more than we think.
I read a quote just recently about parents, and it said, focus on teaching your children to enjoy the ordinary, the extraordinary will come naturally. And I thought, wow, you know, that's really be content in the life and find joy in the simple or the routine, and don't be dismayed. And then be little just naturally, you know, fall witness to the extraordinary and will recognize it. So, you know, so often you try for the big vision. And I think part of Ecclesiastes here then with justice is to say, you know, as we've been discussing, it doesn't come overnight, but life does, and some will continue to come. That's what you can be assured of.
Maybe I'm going to turn this around, but perhaps in spite of all the injustice you see, don't lose the joy you have. And I mean, that's what I'm seeing in this. It's like, he says there are things you can be happy about. There are things that should upset you. Don't let vengeance rob you of joy.
Right. Well, that's it. We're done.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so the secret that we all have to pursue here is how to inhabit both of those spaces at the same time. And you can inhabit one space without being hypocritical of the other. I think that's really important. Anna.
Oh, I just heard something on the news, like maybe a couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure. But, I mean, there are small things you can do to help whoever's in front of you. And there's a couple in Fairfield who, now I may get the details wrong, but in essence, they were trying to get all the liquor stores in the area to boycott Russian vodka. So, you know, being a little strike back at Russian economy, you know, it's not a lot, really, but it's something. And it made them feel good, and their neighbors, and every owner of the liquor store they spoke to did it.
Right.
So, you know.
So I think I'm going to make I think it might be a bold statement here, but if we can figure out how to be joyful and living and eating and drinking and just enjoying life, maybe we can figure out how to do that on a regular basis. We also will have the strength to stare straight at it and bold-faced and brave at the really bad things that are happening.
Well, I like how this woman, I watched Miss Night did in the mirror or something like that. And, this woman, she's a ballerina in Russia. And she stood up to Putin. She said, what he's doing is wrong. They might kick me out of the country, but I'm going to stand up for it.
Yeah. I mean, people are being very brave right now, braver than I have rarely been in my life. If you want to be reassured about the end of this chapter, that it's going to be all tied up in a neat bow, but unfortunately you're mistaken, because it's not even the wise fully understand. Let's finish the passage. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe labor that was done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, thinking of. Then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim to know, they cannot really come. So here we are, stuck again with this conundrum. Even the wise, even the people we respect, can't fully comprehend it. Now, is that really true? Yeah. Because we think we understand it, and then no, we don't. And it's just any.
I was gonna say, I think the more wise you are, the more you realize that people are stupid.
Yeah. I told you I was going to circle back to this original verse 1 of the chapter to talk about this a little bit. So, who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard feelings. So, I want to circle back, to my dad and the fact that he loves this passage so much. Now, my dad didn't have a perfect life. He was in a big family, they didn't have a lot of money. They always watched out for other people. When growing up, my dad would quote this Ecclesiastes verse and the other one, I'm not sure, where's the other one about work in your hands? There's another Ecclesiastes reference to that. I think Julie's going to find it for us. But that's just not to say that my dad lived without tragedy. He had two of his three other brothers were alcoholics and died of alcoholism. When I was growing up, my youngest brother, Patrick, died of leukemia at 4 years old. He lost my mom, over 10 years ago to a chronic debilitating years of caring for her. And today, I'm calling him on his birthday with his young bride, who's, I think, 89, you know. He is so happy. So he's learned how to coexist in that space where really bad things happen. And he can say with confidence, you know, that he knows how to do verse 15. He knows how to enjoy life. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't recognize the tragedy. That it coexists with a joyful, happy life. It can coexist together. So the question is, can you think of other people that come to mind who've done the same thing?
I was thinking first, the years of my life, trying to figure out this system, this combination. Okay, when I have, on February, when I have the kids, teaching children worship. Watching the kids, child activity. You know, so these children goldfish. Okay, jump, you jump. I run with it. Another keep track. I just saw Joe's goldfish. Well, Joe, okay? I'll take care of that. You know, so it's more like they just believe. They don't. It's the whole understand the world so much better than most of us. Adults, they have to stay in lives. And everything.
God often speaks direction.
And yeah, and that's what happens. That's having that child, especially in their first chapter. You know, it's all in place.
You know, a person I think of that many of you know is Bill Carter. Guy who had really hard life. Guy who, for part of his life, lived in a boxcar and a train with his family. His family on a river. A guy who lost his suddenly lost his the love of his life just to sudden illness. You know, and those of us who know Bill know he was filled with joy, just filled with overflowing. So again, that's someone who learned how to live in both of those spaces at the same time. Any other examples?
My years, they're always gonna be BFFs, that's what we told one another. She's the same age. She grew up in a family of 6 children. Her father was an alcoholic, and he was also very unfaithful. Her mother was schizophrenic and was diagnosed when my friend was in her teens. Her brothers were abused by the father. On another day, abused her. She was sexually abused by one of her brother's friends. And when I comfort and picking up, that's who I call. And to me, she is the person who was placed in my life to see exactly what you're talking about, that it does exist. And I think there was a piece of me that used to compare myself to her, like, how can I be so down about something when this person has done this? But I don't think that's the point of Robin. I think the point of Robin in my life is to say there's balance. There is this ability to have tragedy and difficulty and have sunshine. So it's not so much a comparison, it's an encouragement. She's meant to be an encouragement in my life, not something to bring me down and make me feel like I can't attain that. And I think if we look to anybody, if I look to anybody in this room or anybody in this church or anybody who I work with, et cetera, I think that's what it's really about. It's about looking to that example with a bit of neutrality, where you could say, what am I to learn? What am I supposed to be learning? And I think because she is so valuable to me, there's a fair amount for me to be enriched by with that relationship.
You know. That's fantastic. Hold on to that person.
She's in New
I-
Hampshire.
all of us
Great,
should-
she's in Oklahoma, but
All of us should have somebody like that in our lives. Absolutely. You know, and what I'd like to say in closing is, you know, at the core of the Christian life, this notion of resurrection is exactly this, that we can broken, suffering people come to God and be resurrected into a joyful life that lets us be happy. That lets us be happy. So that's all I have for now.
Can I add one step? Just that I'm certain your father is incredibly proud. And so will we. Did a great job this morning. He's not a bad man.
That's it. Thank you, guys.
Cheers.